in my experience, there are two common things that we end up, areas that we are grieving in these cases. So one is our present identity, what we think about ourselves now. What you think about yourself by and large determines how you feel in the world, because a lot of our thoughts in the world as we go about our days aren't about other people. They're about ourselves and who we are. Hello, my beautiful friends. My name is Dr. Beck.
And I am Christine Barker, and this is Am I Doing It Wrong? A podcast for doctors by doctors. Dr. Beck is a mindset coach and medical doctor who specialises in liberating driven professional women from the limitations of perfectionism, imposter syndrome, and people pleasing. She's basically the cheat code for getting out of your own way, showing up authentically, and living a life you're proud of.
And Christine is a medical educator and nephrologist who creates resources for doctors in training that I truly think are an unfair advantage. She makes complex topics super simple and takes the pain and uncertainty out of passing your medical exams. Christine and I connected a few years ago via our online platforms, and over the years we've discussed countless highs, lows, and in-betweens of doctor life. And in doing so, we've experienced firsthand the power of vulnerable conversations to show us where we're getting in our own way and underestimating our capacity.
So we want you to be part of the conversation and experience these same results. Every week on the pod, we'll be bringing you conversations which shine light in dark places, normalise the doctor journey, ease unnecessary suffering, and give you actionable steps to thrive in all facets of your life. So grab a cuppa and get cozy for this week's episode of Am I Doing It Wrong? The podcast for doctors by doctors.
Right, hello my beautiful friends, and welcome back to our channel. It is so good to be here with you guys again for another episode of our podcast, Am I Doing It Wrong? I'm so glad that I get to be here with you, Christine, this week, because it has been a massive week in the medical world for people and on both ends of the spectrum, because some of the specialty exam results have come out, in particular for physicians, and it's always such a challenging, well, it's just such a far-ranging emotional time for us, because we're having experiences anything from, passing this massive feat, getting over this mountain that we've been focused on for, 1 to 2 years and working so hard towards. And so it is champagne celebrations and relief, I think, in most cases for people who have had their life on hold. And on the other side of the spectrum, we know that these exams aren't like the exams that everyone has taken to get to the point of being a doctor in so many ways, because, we have a very large proportion of people who don't pass these exams. Obviously not due to the fact that they're not intelligent, brilliant people, but just because of how the exams are set up and how scores are weighted. So it is common, I believe it's inevitable that every year a lot of people, despite all of their work, don't make it through. So with all of your work that you do to help the BPTs work through their exams, I would just love to speak to you about what's been happening from your side of things. And I know that you are heavily invested in a lot of people who are a combination of people who have passed and haven't passed. So yeah, tell us about what this last week has been like for you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Beck. And I am actually really grateful that you're here and that I'm speaking to you, because I do feel that there are questions I'd like to ask you to try and see if we can help some of the people who are going through a tough time just now since the exam result day. So I guess to give people a bit of context, so every year I run courses that relate to the clinical exam, and this year was the sort of biggest, kind of most expansive version of that. And just working with these young people who are sitting their exams year after year, that sort of created the course as it was. But we had over 100 people in that course from all over Australia and New Zealand. And what was unique about our course as opposed to other courses was that we did live interactive coaching. So we would actually encourage, we'd go into small groups with students who were participating in the course, and they would, learn different skills and practice them, and we would coach them through it. So it was a very intimate way to run a course. And obviously I didn't get to know every single person one-on-one, But there were people who kept showing up and showing up and showing up, and they became very, very familiar to me. And so even though I'm not, it's not my cohort, they belong to all the different cohorts, all the different hospitals, I feel very connected to the people who came to the course. And I guess since the results came out last week, I've been made aware that, there's obviously lots of celebrations and lots of positive stories, and it's lovely to share those moments with those people. But equally, I've been getting some emails from people who didn't pass, who didn't get there. And it's just a really harrowing experience. It's so disappointing. And what I've been sort of noticing is that I guess there's a few, from working with people who were in that situation already during the course, so obviously working at my hospital and within my course, I was definitely aware of some people who had approached me and had told me it was their second time or so. And so I do know how to, or I've had experience with nurturing people who are sitting for their second or third time through this exam. And what I've found is that one of the key things that gets them to the other side is mindset and rebuilding confidence from the ground up. And so it feels like in order to overcome what's just happened, you've been working for months and then all of a sudden this result hasn't gone your way. It seems to me that the next natural step would be grieving for what you've lost and working through that emotion and making sure you do feel that emotion, you do process that emotion, let it come out of you, because the last thing you want is to not process that emotion now and see that emotion again when you start studying for this exam again, right? That is not the time you want to deal with this emotion. You want to sort that out right now. And then after that, it's about rebuilding confidence, which is easier said than done. So it feels like on one hand, yes, there are techniques and ways to practice, and that all comes next year. And obviously I'll be running the course again next year, and I'll be building in some special, attention and special layers to the course for people in this unique situation. Because it is a different ballgame from sitting first time. I believe it's such a different challenge. But I guess what I wanted to do today with you, Beck, was sort of bring to you those things. Like, I guess maybe first with the grieving, and then second of all, building your confidence again. Because obviously what you do, and you can maybe tell, and for my audience, maybe what you do in terms of working with people who are in those situations, and how you work on that mindset to give people the strength and to reset them to go into this exam again and come out successful. So I'd love to, get your perspective on this. Have you worked with, in your coaching practice, have you worked with people who've been through these kind of challenges before?
I've worked with people during the exams and in the lead up to the exams. Have I worked with anybody who has failed? I can't think of anyone who I've worked through that failure process with yet. But definitely amongst all of my clients, a lot of them have these perfectionistic tendencies, because I think it's just, something that's built into us through medicine. And yes, so I work mainly, almost exclusively with doctors as a mindset coach. And the remnants of past failures, not necessarily failures from, the time where we are working together or the immediate year prior, but those remnants from the failures that they had years ago, be it like a year in medicine that didn't go right, getting into med school and all the hurdles that some of us had to jump over to do that, and seeing those failures from the distant past carry through into their mindsets and really hinder them and hurt them and make their life harder in the present time with me, that is very evident to me. So when you talk about the process that this will be, including grieving at first, I just could not agree enough with you. If we aren't careful with how we recover from these things that are very debilitating for a lot of us, and very painful at the time, if we're not really careful with our recovery, then they can continue to hurt us years on. So yes and no. I haven't worked with anybody specifically who hasn't gotten through the BPT exams, but the importance of carefully managing this process is seen with my current clients who are mainly doctors and high achievers and prone to perfectionism and very high levels of self-criticism.
So if I came to you and I wanted to move through that process and say I've just had a really disappointing result, and say I've failed my clinical exam and it feels like everyone else on planet Earth has passed. That's what it feels like. That's not necessarily true, because, you know, I know and you know that there are lots of people in this situation. There's lots of people been through this situation. If you're in this situation right now and you're listening to this, you're definitely not alone. But when this happens, I think the first natural tendency is to feel like you're the only one. Even if you know of others, you still feel so isolated and alone and disappointed and just dealing with those emotions. So what would your first steps be? How do I get from this place of where I am right now? How do I crawl out of that?
Well, I think you said if somebody was to come to you or me, and going to somebody or being willing to speak actually and just see your thoughts that are happening, that is the first most important thing. And it really is a whole step in itself, because what I see happen in these situations is there's so much shame surrounding it, intrinsic to what you just said, which is you feel like the only person. And with that idea that you are the only person, so commonly shame is tied up on that. And that makes you not want to look at what you think in this scenario. You just desperately want to hide from this shame because it's such a painful experience. So you don't even want to look at those thoughts. You don't want to look at what's going on in your brain. You don't want to look at the situation. You just you're constantly trying to escape. And if you can come to someone, if you have a safe space in your life right now, and what I would do with my clients is I would just have them talk, just see and share. It's not really for me, it's for them. I want them to see all of the thoughts that are going through their mind, all of the, everything from the thoughts that seem very realistic to them, the thought of I'm the only one, but also those thoughts that they kind of are aware are quite absurd, the really big, painful predictions about how terrible the future's going to be and what this means about them and how they're an imposter and all those things. I want them to see really clearly all of those, the whole spectrum of their thoughts. And if you didn't have a safe space is completely critical, as I said, with the shame. So if you don't have somebody who you can completely trust to share these thoughts with, I would actually recommend not sharing them. I'd instead recommend writing them down, because the last thing that we want to do when you're in this really vulnerable state is have you share these thoughts with somebody who is going to make you feel more unsafe and more unworthy, playing into all those debilitating beliefs that you're so susceptible right now. So ideally bring it to somebody who's in a trusted space and just get everything out. You'll have to do this not once, but many times with these thoughts, many times of just seeing what is going on in your head. And if you don't have a safe space, A, go to a professional, or B, start with writing down. So safe space is critical, and just meet the reality of everything that's going on in your mind right now. So that is my first step. And truly, because of the shame, that can be a very hard step to step into before you even start thinking about whatever strategy you're going to use.
And I think that's such an interesting, the word shame in this situation, because from my perspective, as the person who is, I guess, teaching and on the other side of this and in that position, when I am looking at you, if you failed your exam, that is not, I don't think there's anything to be ashamed of or embarrassed about, or all of those words that you're probably feeling right now. I don't feel like that is something that, I think it's unfair that you would feel that way. I know why it happens, but there's nothing to be ashamed of. And I've sort of seen lots of people come through this exam and lots of people fail and come through the exam, and it is unfortunately one of those things. You can be the best candidate on an exam day, something goes wrong, not your way. Things come up, there's a cognitive bias on the day, there's nerves, there's all these things. I guess it doesn't mean anything is wrong with you. It doesn't mean anything about how you are as a doctor. It really doesn't mean anything at all. It's just an unemotional, that you actually didn't get through and we'll get you through next year. To me, as the person guiding people through this, there's nothing to be ashamed of, but it's so hard to hear that. And I guess, do you have any way to unpack that for people? So the root of the shame and how we can shine a light on that to sort of dissolve it. How do we make that shame go away?
I completely agree with everything you've said. There's no bone in my body that believes that it gives us any useful information if somebody doesn't pass this exam. I don't think there's any useful information in that this person passed and this person didn't. I think it has essentially nothing to do with this person's present performance as a doctor or future performance. We wouldn't be able to really tell that by whether they passed or failed. So I just can't agree more. But I think the reason why it's usually a very long jump for us to be able to see that from this phase, because our mind works in this highly associative way. Our brain doesn't produce thoughts for us in a way that is linear and logical and full of reason. There's this phenomenon called mood congruent memory bias, and it is what the name suggests. When you have an emotion in your body, shame, the mood in this bias, what it does is, the bias is that mood that you're in, the shame, makes your brain more easy to select. It brings forward all of the other memories that it has, or a lot of other memories that it has associated with that same feeling of shame. So one of the reasons why it can be so hard to look at the other perspectives in this situation is because you don't have shame at this moment likely just from not passing this exam, but because of the way that our brain works here, you probably have shame not only with not passing this exam, but it's brought forward all these other situations in your life in the past as evidence for why you should feel shame. So you've got this stack of scenarios about how, there is actually a problem with you for not passing this exam, and we can justify that you shouldn't have passed the exam and that you should feel shame. Now again, it's not logical, but it's just one of these biases that we have. Our mind is highly associative. It's not logical. It doesn't produce beautiful, logical, factual thoughts. But in this case, especially with a very salient emotion like shame, when we have a shame experience in our life, that's a highly salient emotion. Evolutionarily, shame occurs when we believe that we're going to be isolated from the pack, which is a threat to our lives. So when we have shameful experiences, our mind tags them. It activates that amygdala section in our brain. And so I just want to emphasize that this is why shame doesn't respond to logic, certainly not in any fast way. Don't blame yourself if you cannot receive the message right now of, it doesn't mean anything about you, you're fine, you're going to be great. If you can't receive that right now, again, there is nothing wrong with you. This is just how our neurobiology works in a lot of cases. So that's why I say the first step should be actually facing all of these thoughts, because we don't have a chance at working out. So the shame comes from thoughts. Your thoughts create your emotions. I want to see the whole story that you're telling yourself here so that we can see what we're dealing with, what the threat is. If, on the other hand, you're trying to hide from your thoughts, which again is reasonable, the shame is so painful. Every time you bring the thoughts to your mind, that thought creates the emotion of shame, and suddenly you want to jump out of your skin. You don't want to be in your body anymore. Getting all of those thoughts out shows us which thoughts are creating the emotion of shame. It helps us see all of the threats, if you like, in our environment, as opposed to if we're trying to hide from what we actually think is a threat to our safety, what's creating our shame, we're going to constantly feel unsafe in that. If we're trying to hide from those thoughts, we're going to constantly feel on edge, because on some level we have the awareness that something is very wrong. So facing the thoughts is the first step from multiple different aspects. And recognizing that nothing's going wrong if you don't just snap out of it or think positive or take the positive perspective. I wouldn't expect you to.
No, and sort of repeatedly getting those thoughts on paper or with a professional or a safe space, like you said, it's not going to be one session and one and done. It's going to be bringing it up again and sort of looking at those thoughts. And I guess I was just thinking about other thoughts that come up or that candidates have said to me before. And apart from feeling ashamed and embarrassed, they have these fears of the future, but also fears about what other people think. And other people meaning their colleagues and also the consultants that are going to hire them in future. And I've been very open about, and I feel like if you asked any consultant, they would say the same thing, is that the exam is a tick box. You need to tick the box to apply for jobs, but in no way, like no one's looking at how many times it took you. No one, that's irrelevant to whoever's giving you the job. There's that box and there's all the other boxes, the research box and all the things we talked about last week. So they're not looking at the clinical exam as some kind of measure of ability. It's just tick box, done, now you can apply for the job. And that would be, I would say, the commonplace consultant way to approach that, because we're on the other side of it and we're not in direct competition with you, right? And I feel like there is this other element. Not everyone is going to be doing this. A lot of people are very kind, but there is, you know, a lack of kindness that can come out at these times, and that comes from insecurity, I believe. So people who've maybe passed the exams and seen a colleague not pass an exam, on some level, if they have insecurities, that might make them feel better about themselves, and then they might verbalize something quite hurtful. I think that's the kind of scenario that I can see that coming up in, because if you're very secure in yourself, I can't imagine that you'd say something mean, but I know that this does happen. So I guess just pointing out that what other people think of you, I mean, I think that you'd probably find a lot of people are thinking nice things about you. The people who are not really don't matter and they have deep insecurities. You really they just shouldn't be in your world anymore. That's fine, just cut them if you're coming across people like that. But honestly, when it was my exam and I somehow passed, and was so grateful to pass, but there were 2 people in my cohort that failed. And honestly, these 2 people were some of the best in our cohort. They were consistent. They were really, really good. I did bedside shoots with both of them and they knocked my socks off every time. And they were good at long cases and short cases. They were the whole package. They were put together. They had a bad exam day, but there was no part of me when I heard that news, like I was like, thank goodness, relief that I passed. Also kind of confused, because I'm like, well, I felt like they were actually better than I was from my perspective. And there was no part of me that thought anything less of them. No part of me, honestly, because they were good. And I think that that's probably quite a common scenario as well, except people don't know how to talk to you. People don't know how to come and say nice things to you at this time as well. What would you say about that sort of aspect, Beck, in terms of managing that fear of what other people are thinking and almost interacting with people when you're in that situation where you're worried about what they're thinking? How do you go about your day-to-day job on the ward?
Yeah, absolutely. Because isn't it just, it's crazy that something like this that is truly so significant can happen in your life that is, it's very distressing. And then you show up the next day to your high pressure job once again and you have to act like you haven't just had this loss in your life and this disappointment. So, I mean, when you said some people will be unkind and you link that to insecurity, Brené Brown says that that research indicates that we tend to judge people in the places where we feel the most shame, where we're the most susceptible to shame. And we tend to pass judgment when we feel like we're doing slightly better in that area. So you might get the sense that somebody feels a sense of superiority to you, and that might be true that they feel that sense of superiority. But it's important to recognize that that sense of superiority is a coping mechanism for them to deal with their shame. Because I completely agree with you. A secure person doesn't pass judgment in these cases. Even in the case of being somebody who helps people and identifies as somebody who is a helpful person, and then they don't seek help themselves. If you're resistant to seeking help yourself, then your helping behaviors are probably related to you getting that sense of self-worth and security and superiority out of helping, rather than purely from the contribution aspect. So all humans are susceptible to this. And right now, the people who didn't pass their exams, we suspect that you are feeling insecure because of those stories about how important the exam is and what it means to you. And I hope that you don't take the word story in a demeaning way, but I mean the way that you're telling, the way that you're interpreting what's happened in the world, not passing your exams and what you're making it mean. But every single person, passing your exam or not, has insecurities. I promise you. Every single consultant, which is where everyone is aiming to get by passing this exam, right, to consultancy. Would you agree, Christine? Everyone, even decades senior consultants, still have insecurities in their day-to-day life. Yeah. So therefore, ongoing, you will experience judgment from other people. But this is not directly related to the fact that you didn't pass your exam. This says more about their insecurities and their inability to cope with the shame that brings up when the topic comes up, rather than the fact that you didn't pass, and therefore it being an indicator that you are actually inferior to them. So if you can sit back and maybe listen back to this segment again, just to really solidify the idea that whenever judgment is passed, it is rooted in a sense of, it's a coping mechanism for people to lessen the sense of shame that comes up when the topic comes up. So if they ask you or they comment on how your exam went, they see you when they think about the exam or something like that, and they pass judgment on you, that just shows us that there is a part of them when they think about exams that makes them feel shame. They might not be consciously aware of it. They may not know that that's why they're passing judgment. But if the topic comes up and they pass judgment, then the likely cause is them trying to cope with their own shame. So that's one thing to know. And it's unfair to ask you to do this extra labor of dealing with other people's misplaced judgments at this time. You have enough to deal with in processing this situation. But this is also the reality of the world. Unfortunately, the world is not a just place. It's not fair that you have to do this extra work to manage their judgments that they're projecting onto you. However, to do that work during a time where you will feel very susceptible to people's judgment is the most loving thing that you can do for yourself. And that's what I would want the most for you, to not internalize their judgments and to do this bit of extra work, not for them, not because you have to, but because you want to take care of yourself right now.
And I think another thing that I've learned over many years of, I guess, trial and error with difficult people and difficult scenarios in other contexts is that this is quite hard to hear, but what's true is that people can't hurt you unless you believe what they're saying is true. And unfortunately, in this situation where you're feeling all sorts of things about yourself, someone coming along and giving their 10 cents is likely to be quite piercing. And the reason it's piercing is because on some level you believe it. If you didn't believe it, you'd be like, what's wrong with them? I'm having a bad day, right? But because you believe it, it really, really hurts. And then you're really at risk of it just cements and cements and cements. And I can think of during this exam season, there was one particular person who I was working with, and they had failed their exam last year. And the very first time I met them, they were saying things like, I'm not sure if I'm cut out for this. I don't feel like I'm like everyone else. Those kind of things. And it was like 2 weeks later, I saw them again and they were like a different person. And all it took was for them to see their own potential again and to see that everything they had just said was not necessarily true in that moment. And I think that's what's so special about what you do, Beck, is that you're taking those, I guess, those thoughts and feelings and self-belief system, and you're able to transform it into something that people can work with and then step into their potential. And I guess it just feels like that sort of scene in Sister Act I always talk about, when the quiet nun sort of finds her voice. There was so many moments like that in this particular person that I'm thinking of, but equally in all of the people that I've looked after who have failed and who have then passed. There's always the Sister Act moment, and it feels like that moment only happens not because of courses or seeing patients, or it happens because whatever is holding them down, they let go of. All of this stuff you're talking about. And it's almost like I don't fully understand exactly. You have that ability to know exactly what you're doing when you're coaching someone to help them let go of this. So do you have anything else that you could add to that part? Like how to, it's maybe a sort of advanced class from where we are right now, where we're grieving, but in the future, how would you go from thinking, I'm not sure I'm cut out for this, to, nah, I can do this exam, I can nail this exam? How do you get from there to there in future?
My kind of belief that I've developed in coaching through working with lots of clients is that I don't feel that we have to do that much work to create these positive, optimistic thoughts. I think they come very naturally to us when we become aware of what's possible and what's available to us. I usually don't have to. I might give little prompts and direction for my clients in these areas, but in general, once they get in that state, they just reel off all of what's possible and what they want and what's important. It's not usually a problem to create motivation there. But instead, what I see is the barrier is these sort of handbrakes that we put on ourselves, which is the fear thoughts, these pessimistic thoughts, these very these states where we're very fixated on the threats. So the work really, from my experience, is to take the handbrake off in those areas, and then the rest of it comes very naturally. So that sort of next step would be a prompt to help some people start to work through this process and figure out where your handbrakes might be. So as we said, grieving is really important first. And in my experience, there are two common things that we end up, areas that we are grieving in these cases. So one is our present identity, what we think about ourselves now. What you think about yourself by and large determines how you feel in the world, because a lot of our thoughts in the world as we go about our days aren't about other people. They're about ourselves and who we are. You know those days where you back yourself, believe in yourself. You're like, yeah, I'm a good person. I add so much goodness in the world. You think those more generous thoughts about yourself, and you go about the world having a good day and subsequently feeling good and acting, your best self in those days as well. But when you have an experience like this, it's very easy to believe all the thoughts that kind of steal away that identity that you had about you being a good, capable person with a lot to offer the world. So that's one of the places where I'd like you to look at what you think you've lost here in terms of your identity. One of the things you might need to grieve is, I thought I was this kind of person. I thought I was the kind of person who would pass this exam on the first, second, third go. I thought I was that kind of person, which means that I am smart or resourceful, whatever you think that means about you. In your mind, you've potentially lost that identity. You don't believe those thoughts about yourself right now in this moment anymore. So that is something that needs your attention to grieve. And I'm not saying that identity is actually lost, But part of your pain right now could be coming from the ideas, the conclusions that you're drawing that that's not you anymore. You were wrong. Or now you've proven that that's not you. Now, the other area that you might need to grieve is your expectations, your hopes, the vision that you had for your future. Because now the way you might be interpreting what's happened, not passing the exams, is you might be thinking, well, I'm not going to be this specialist now. I'm not going to be able to work here. I'm not going to be able to have a baby or a partner or whatever passing this exam meant for your future. That is another area that you'll need to grieve if you had the hope or the expectation that you would pass this exam. So ask yourself those questions in particular, those two questions. Ask for your thoughts about what this means, not passing this exam this year means for your identity, for who you are, and what it means for your future. I'm not asking for you to tell me some wisdomful, beautiful truth about what's possible. I'm asking you to give me your most unedited, pitiful, hurtful, unreasonable thoughts. I want all of those out on paper. So once you have those two down, now we can start to see the next step of our work, because some of those thoughts, as you share them with somebody else or as you write them down, you'll realize, remember, become conscious of the fact that they aren't true, and that'll happen naturally. No effort, just the fact that you shared that you saw them from a different perspective, not just circling in your mind, you'd be like, oh, that's not true. Put it down. Some of those thoughts, maybe in a lot of those thoughts, you'll need to pick up and look at, because you'll find that you believe them. And that is our next step of work, because you can't go on being productive at work and putting in all of your effort and even starting to study again or go and socialize and enjoy your life if you believe the thought, my future is not going to work out. I'm going to be too late to have a family now. I'm not going to get the job I want. You're not going to be able to continue working productively and enjoying your life if you have those thoughts that you believe. So finding those specific thoughts for you becomes our next step of work. We don't just band-aid it with saying, oh, it's possible that I'll pass next year, and just trying to think positive thoughts. We want to make this individualized to you. So it's going to get worse before it gets better, because as you see all these thoughts, they might become more painful. When I have really painful situations like this, I sometimes will cry when I'm journaling. And I haven't cried before, I've just been feeling this anxiety. But as I see this thought that's really painful and I believe in the moment, that's when I get the maximum hurt, when I see the thought. But I know, my advantage is I know from my experience that it's a good sign that things get better from there. And you likely don't know that yet. So I want to offer you that right now. It's going to get worse. You're going to resist journaling. You're going to resist talking to people because it will make you feel worse immediately. But that's part of the pain of the transformation as well, to get to the other side. So I guess just to say once more, what we always say is how you feel doesn't tell you whether a bad thing is happening. A bad feeling at the time doesn't mean that you're not perfectly on the right track to getting better as well. Does that all make sense?
That is amazing. I've got so many questions based on that. So I was going to ask you, I think you have answered it. So you gave us like what to grieve in terms of all those different aspects of what you might be grieving, to get in touch with the actual layers of grief and what you're going through. And then I guess I was going to ask you the best way to grieve, because I think that journaling thing where your feelings come up is just so powerful. And you would be into the psychological aspects of this, but I remember listening to some resource, it might have been a podcast or something, when I was going through something tough, and they were talking about feeling the feelings, and I hadn't been feeling feelings for whatever I was going through at the time. And what they were saying was that once you feel the feeling and you actually sit with the feeling, it actually goes away. And I found that actually happened. I would feel whatever it was I was upset about, and I would literally just feel it and breathe into it, and like it would actually evaporate. Whereas for months I had been putting it down and it kept coming up, putting it down kept coming up. So I felt it there was a way to let go of the feeling. And I know that might sound a bit woo to some people listening, but I guess that was my lived experience of it, was that when you feel it, it will get gentle, it will become more gentle, and it will leave you. And I've heard other people saying things like dance and exercise and almost moving the emotion through your body and things like that. I've heard other people say things like that. Do you have I mean, is that founded in anything? Do you agree with those aspects, or is there a good way to grieve something that you would recommend for anyone listening?
I personally so I think there are sort of two levels that we grieve at. One is on the intellectual level with these thoughts, and the other is on the emotional level. And as I said before, the thoughts and emotions are intrinsically linked, but we may need to work in one or both area in particular to be able to process the grief. You know, for example, if there's thoughts that are painful that we just can't look at and we keep kind of pushing away, there's work that we need to do to allow ourselves to see those thoughts and question if they're true or not. And emotionally, I'd love to share some of the emotional aspect too, because, you know, as doctors, we are experts at the override button, as you say. And to me, that really means we're really experts at emotional suppression. And people are doing research into that in healthcare workers at the moment because it's such a widespread phenomenon. You know, I work with the most brilliant people. You know, they're consultants, registrars on specialist training programs, PhDs, we've got lawyers, the most intelligent, successful people. And our first couple of sessions for almost everyone, I have to work really hard to help them identify an emotion, to really hold that space, because so many of us have, through this kind of, well, inhumane, if you will, training, we have thought that the most adaptive way to get through is to suppress our emotions. So a lot of us don't know how to feel an emotion, and the emotions that come with grief are very compelling, powerful emotions. And if we allow them to stay present in our body, then they can cause a lot of, we can be very uncomfortable with that and resist them and have negative consequences from that. So the process of feeling an emotion is frequently referenced in both psychology and also in some, you know, ancient religions and philosophies like Buddhism, for example. This is something that is perhaps new to our corporate 2023 world, but not in these other spheres. So a simple way that I teach my clients is 4 steps. So say, let's pick, what emotion would you say might be a common one to come up in this situation where somebody hasn't passed their exams? Can you think of an emotion?
See, this is where I find emotions hard to explain, because there's words like shame, embarrass, and I'm never sure if they're an emotion. Like, I feel sad, maybe, I guess, but I am the typical example of a doctor who's unable to describe what I'm exactly feeling. So yeah, sorry, Beck.
No, but you're probably right. And this is exactly something that I was working on with a client last week, because she had this sort of situation that it meant a lot. And so there wasn't just one emotion either. There were multiple emotions. And every time she felt the emotion, she was trying to dodge it and do something to get rid of it. So the actual experience was very overwhelming because there were so many emotions happening, like ping pong just coming up from everywhere. And every time the emotion comes into your body, you try and escape it and do something. So it's very chaotic. Or if it doesn't feel overwhelming, you just numb as well. Numb with things to make the emotion go away. So let's just take the emotion of sadness. Sadness is interesting because it is actually such a beautiful emotion. When I first started coaching, I had to do a lot of work. When I first got coaching myself, I had to do a lot of work on feeling my emotions because I didn't really know what it meant either. And when you just feel a pure emotion, even if it's an unpleasant emotion, without the judgment and the resistance on top, that experience of just that single emotion is actually quite lovely. So bear with me here. This will be hard at first, but it's not like you're walking into fire here. You're actually walking in to be more connected and feel more safe in your body. So if you take the emotion of sadness, you have the thought, I've let myself down, and you feel sad. The first thing to do is pause and turn internally, because the way that I describe emotions is being a completely internal experience. So an emotion is your conscious experience of the sensations and energy that you can feel in your body. There's a lot of disagreement about what an emotion is and isn't, so this is just the way that I describe it. So the second step, after you've paused and taken your attention internally, is to go through and note the sensations and the energy, these more pure descriptive words about what the emotion actually is. So the word sadness is out of your mind, and now you're saying, oh, I can feel a sinking in my stomach. I can feel heaviness in my chest. You can use colors or temperature, so I can say it feels hot in my chest and dark. Some people might describe swirling or a particular color. And you kind of pick out, I like to pick out the most noticeable sensations first, and then I like to do a full body scan, going through and noting the actual sensations. Step 2, noting the sensations. Step 3 is naming the emotion again. So now you've got this conscious awareness, you've done a full body scan, you know exactly what sadness is in your body, and I just would encourage you to say, this is sadness. Name the emotion. So what you're doing here is you're tagging in your mind, you're kind of updating and recalibrating what the emotion of sadness actually is. It's these sensations. And then step 4 is to reassociate, or step 4 is to, reanalyze, reappraise. So a part of the problem with unpleasant or negative emotions and grief situations is that we actually think we have this emotion and we're not okay. We think that having this emotion in our body is not only a reflection of something bad going on in the world, some kind of threat, but also that having the emotion in our body is dangerous in some way. You know, evidenced by the fact that we get this negative emotion in our body and we try and do something to make it go away. We think it's not okay to feel this way. So in this 4th step, you're stepping back and you're saying, I'm feeling sadness. This was the experience I had as I was in real time feeling sadness, and I'm okay. I'm feeling sadness and I'm safe. I'm feeling sadness and I can tolerate it. I'm feeling sadness and I don't need to do anything. So the idea is here we're kind of summarizing what's happened and we're reappraising, because our tendency is to instead feel the emotion, think we're not, or notice the emotion, think we're not okay, and then do something to escape. So we're trying to reappraise and say, no, I am okay. I don't need to do anything. I can tolerate it. So end that sentence with, I'm feeling sadness and I'm okay, or I can tolerate it and I don't need to do anything, with whatever end of the sentence actually speaks to, you know, what your trouble is. Now, the idea here is not that we necessarily will make the emotion go away. I can't guarantee that that will happen. But for me, the purpose of allowing an emotion or feeling an emotion is that we don't react to it, that we're no longer afraid of it, that we do that reappraisal and we say, there's nothing to actually do here, there's nothing to escape here, there's no problem here, so that we can keep allowing it in our body, which stops us from swirling back up into our mind and berating ourselves with more negative thoughts. Or for me, when I wouldn't tolerate an emotion, when I would resist an emotion, that would make it worse, and then I would go and eat. That was the thing that I did to soften my emotions. For other people, they will whine. They will literally whine to their friends. They'll go and complain because the emotion is so much, resisting the emotion has so much energy to it. They're trying to just get rid of it and sort of express it out. Or they will drink wine is the other option, you know. Social media, distraction. I think that's probably the most relatable one for all of us now. Those moments that you pick up your phone when you don't really understand how you got here, most likely was a result of feeling an emotion that you couldn't tolerate. Boredom is also, whether it's sadness or boredom, these emotions we're not comfortable having in our body, so we do something to make them go away. Now, as you said, Christine, when you go through, I think it's that second step where you go through and you mindfully note what sadness actually is. That mindful step can actually make the emotion lessen, I think. It's from that step where I think you start to create some your conscious application of attention will actually change the emotional experience, because the emotion is just a conscious experience. So when you direct your consciousness in a different way, that will change the emotion itself. So for a lot of people, when you go through these 4 steps, it does make the emotion go away, but I don't want that to be the purpose. I want the purpose to be for you to recreate safety with this emotion, to develop a different relationship with this emotion where you don't feel like you need to escape it. And that is so powerful in terms of you being able to make decisions that support you and to be able to have more self-control and feel more control in these situations that are very painful. 4 steps: turn internally, note the sensations, name the emotion, and reappraise. At that end of the sentence, I'm feeling sadness and I'm okay. This whole process should take you no more than 60 to 90 seconds. And then when you do it enough, not only do you develop this new relationship with negative emotions where you no longer resist or try and avoid feeling them because you now know that you're okay, but also the process gets quicker when you need it. So I can do this process now in just 10 seconds or so, and my body realizes, I'm safe. I can feel this emotion. I'm okay. But when you're just starting, let it take time.
I really love everything you just said, and I'm really grateful that you didn't go anywhere near toxic positivity, that you didn't try to change that. It was just an acceptance of what is, but also it was an empowering moment where you're feeling a feeling and then you're also sort of at one with your current state, and you're not having to sprinkle anything positive on, you're just being. And that to me is so refreshing at these times, because I think as we go through the world as well, like what I said earlier, people are going to have trouble interacting with someone who's going through something like this, especially if they got the result they wanted on exam day and they're trying to speak to you and you didn't get the result you wanted. They're going to find you really, really hard to speak to. And I think that's a real place where toxic positivity can come up. Like you say, oh, don't worry, better luck next time. I don't think people are that insensitive, but that kind of theme would come through where, oh, don't worry about it, move on. Like those kind of things that people kind of infer, even if they don't say it quite as outright as that. And I think what you're doing is something totally different and refreshing. So thank you so much for that. It's so powerful.
On the other side too, there will be people who can't control their positive emotions too. They're so happy with their result or whatever's happened to them that they will just say things from that happy place. And while that happiness might be wonderful and genuine for them, they're not in that mindset of being considerate because they're too tied up with their self and their situation in the moment. So, I wouldn't be surprised if that happens as well. It's just another emotional regulation and self-awareness issue that all of us have limitations in and struggle with.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is sort of asking people to, you're in this situation and you're feeling devastated. And then even listening to this conversation we're having, as much as we're sitting here trying to be helpful and trying to give you something to hold on to and a next step to get back on track, I also recognize that can be extremely difficult to receive in this moment. And so I guess I just want to acknowledge that part as well. There are no words sometimes when you're in these situations, and if you're not hearing this at all, it might be worthwhile coming back to this conversation in a few weeks or months as well, and just seeing if it feels different to listen to. And also, I guess Beck and I have set up this platform and this space for a sort of, I guess, we're drawn to being here for you and having a community of like-minded people who are supporting each other. And so although we're just talking to each other right now, I want anyone listening to feel that you can reach out to us, that you can let us know your thoughts. We might even have future conversations based on things that you say. If there are particular struggles, questions for Beck on how to take the next steps, you can be part of this conversation as well. And certainly what I'm noticing is, obviously I wouldn't have the capacity to do this for hundreds and hundreds of people, but what I'm finding is that people, even if they weren't on my course, because I have a YouTube video on failing your exam, someone already reached out to me on the weekend to just, as they just thought, they're just very upset. They haven't come to the course, but they're just saying, please help me. So I guess I'm sort of understanding as well that in the position that I'm in, that there will be some people who maybe are a bit lost and might find us. And I guess I just want to say that you're welcome here. And if we can help in any way, we'd love to. So I guess just to put that out there. Yeah, and as I say, I have and will continue to work with a lot of people in this situation. It's never easy for anyone going through this situation. And what's also true is that I have seen people get to the other side and have beautiful, beautiful careers, and it does not hold them back. In the end, obviously there's delays and things like that, and all of those things that you mentioned, Beck. I think I hadn't really thought about family planning and all of those other layers that you added apart from jobs, but everything for the people that I'm thinking of has worked out. They've got the jobs, they're doing really, really well, they're sort of even more developed in a way due to this experience, and they have been able to turn these kind of experiences into their superpower in one way or another. And so, not to put positive sprinkles on it, but just to say that my lived experience is that there is a reality which you can work towards that is a positive one, and I know that you have it in you. I know that you have it in you to do whatever it is that you want to do, and I'd love to help you do that. Do you have anything else to sort of add to that, Beck?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, from what you were saying, how we have these ideas that, these preconceived plans about how life should be. We really think that we know that if I do this year and this next year and do this after, and go here and there or wherever, or pick this and that, we really think that if we follow that plan, that is our recipe to happiness. And when we believe that thought, it sounds nice at the time and it creates motivation to follow that path. But then when you deviate off the path, suddenly that thought is very maladaptive, because it means that without that path, you can't be happy. And here's the thing. It's wonderful that you're happy when you're following that path and feeling motivated to go down towards it. But just because you believed that thought at the time that this was the path, it doesn't make it true. That particular path that you made up in your head is not the recipe to happiness. It's not how happiness works. And that also, with saying that, there's happiness available in so many other places. And as Christine says, better realities, going down different paths that you've just never considered before. So even just recognizing the error in the thinking, that this thinking was working for you before, but realizing that, and that was good then, it's good to run with whatever makes you feel the right way and act the right way, but it was just a delusion. It wasn't true that this was your best pathway and this is how your life has to go. That was a lie. Your life is going to go a different direction, and it will be, I believe, in my belief system, it will be better for you this way. And I just want you to consider that maybe it's not true that original path, passing the exam this year, it wasn't for the best.
And I think there's so much wisdom in what you say. And again, it can be so hard to hear that on this side of it. And then in hindsight, you can look back and say, I know exactly what she meant when she said that.
Yeah, exactly. So I think what would be really lovely is, and I think this has been quite a long podcast, but if anybody's watching to the end and you're with us right now, it may not be that you haven't passed your exam, that you're in this exact situation, but I think we can all relate to the experience of having these plans and expectations and then having them fall through in a really painful way for us. So if you relate to that, if you could just leave us a heart down below, not so much for us, but for everybody else, and just remind the people who need to hear it right now that this is a normal human life experience, that they are not alone, that this happens to all of us in different ways at different times of our life. And I'm sorry to say, but this won't be the last time for any of us that these kinds of things happen. We're all in the same challenging, painful boat here, and nobody gets to get through life by missing out on these painful experiences. So share the love around if you feel like supporting everyone. And we're so grateful that you joined us today. And echoing what Christine said, please reach out. I know that not everybody has a safe space in their life to do so.
Yeah, thank you. Be kind to yourself, be kind to each other. I'll see you next time.
I've been waiting all my life for something. I've been down the darkest roads and up in the clouds, but I've always felt that something's missing. That was until